Time for us to check back in with Jesse Stuart in the book, The Thread That Runs So True. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Monday, I told my pupils that somebody had drawn obscene pictures on the walls of the boys' toilet, and that since I couldn't believe I had a pupil in my school that would do such a thing, I hoped each pupil would cooperate with me to protect our school property and help keep it clean. I told them that we planned to paint the house. I told them that this building was our home, that we were a unit, same as a family, and we had to work together. I told them when one pulled, the others should push. Then I explained to them we wouldn't need another dipper, and the only need we had for a water bucket was to carry water. For now, we had a water cooler. I showed them this new gadget, the first one they had ever seen, and they were pleased. That afternoon, they knew we were serious about painting the house. John Conway made ladders for us. He brought our supplies to the schoolhouse. When school was over, Dawn and I started painting the schoolhouse. Instead of taking off soon as school was out, many of the pupils stayed to watch us work. Guy Hawkins and Ova Saylor stayed. "Mr. Stewart, I can paint," Guy Hawkins said. "I'll help you if you don't mind." "And I can paint too," Ova said. Guy Hawkins and I scraped off the old paint while Ova and Dawn started putting on the first coat. The summer days were long and we worked until it was late. We made considerable showing our first day, and while Guy and I removed the old paint, we found a brown stain on the paint-scaled walls up about 4 feet from the ground. It was in blotches, big and brown as autumn oak leaves. Guy Hawkins laughed while I took my knife and scraped on one of these spots. "Don't you know what that is?" Guy asked me. "I'm not sure," I said. "It's amber spittle," Guy laughed. "Somebody has been spitting on the walls." "What do you know about this?" I said, wondering who chewed tobacco among my pupils besides Guy and Ova. We found amber spittle all around the back of the schoolhouse. I knew this was something that had to stop before we got the house painted with our new white paint. The writing in the boys' privy and the spitting of amber on the schoolhouse walls worried me, but I had another school problem that worried me more. I knew the teachers in Lansboro graded school didn't have this problem, as they had a teacher for each grade from the beginning to the junior high school. The pupils in each room were almost on the same age level. Here, I had from the beginners to the 8th grade all in one room. Their ages ran from 5 to 20. This was so in every rural school in Greenwood County. I never thought about this until I had started teaching. The beginners were the most difficult of all to teach. I would bring my beginners up and teach them ABCs on the old dilapidated chart used years and years before I came to Lonesome Valley. My 8th grade pupils had been taught on this same chart. After I had gone over their ABCs with them, they went back to their seats and had nothing to do. They needed more attention than I could give them. Many of them fell asleep in the hot schoolroom. I wondered what to do about this situation. I knew how beginners had been taught in the Greenwood County rural schools in the past. I knew because I had been a beginner in this same type of school. I had been taught to read on this kind of chart, and I still knew everything on it from memory. Once after I had awakened from a nap, I wandered from my seat and found a dead wasp and carried it up to the teacher while he was busy with the recitation. All the pupils laughed. I was given a sound spanking, something I had always remembered, and put back in my seat. Thereafter, I was afraid of my teacher. One of these little fellows I was trying to teach went to sleep. I never thought of spanking him. I let him sleep. What else could I do when I was trying to hear 54 classes recite in 6 hours, give them new assignments, grade their papers? What else could I do when I had to do janitorial work, paint my house, keep the toilets sanitary, the yard cleaned of splintered glass and rubbish, and try to make our school home more beautiful and more attractive than the homes the pupils lived in? One afternoon, after we'd been painting on the house, we got to Conway's late. John Conway sat by the table while Dawn and I ate. The rest of the family had eaten. I told John Conway about my problem with beginners, but he didn't know about schools, and he didn't understand. He said a child should never be allowed to sleep in school. Then I argued the teacher should have something for the child to do interesting enough to keep him awake. I told John that if Upper Lonesome, Lonesome Valley, Unknown, and Chicken Creek rural schools were moved to the valley, the approximate center of all these surrounding school districts, it could be worked out as it was in Lansboro graded school. It would take fewer teachers, and the teachers would have pupils on an age level. One teacher could handle the beginners. His face reddened when he asked me how the pupils could get to school as far away as the valley. Haul them by bus or by jolt wagon, I told him. He laughed a wild laugh and told me I didn't know about the Lonesome Creek Road in winter. I told him the time would come when we would get gravel on the roads, and then we could have this type of school. He said he hoped when this time came, when they took Lonesome Valley School from the people where his children, himself, his father, and his grandfather had gone to school, he would be dead and know nothing about it. He went into as much of a tirade against this ideal as if someone had walked into a field of his green-growing tobacco and started chopping it down with a hoe. He said my thought was dangerous, and as for me, if I wanted to be a good teacher and stay healthy, I better stop having such crazy talk. I was in his house, I taught his children, I couldn't tell him what I thought, but I thought if I ever got to a position high enough in education, if I was ever elected any kind of legislator, so help me God, I would abolish this abominable trustee system if I could. If I couldn't do it single-handed, I would help others do it. Why should I, a teacher, be at the mercy of John Conway? Why should John Conway have more power than the superintendent, elected by members of the Greenwood County Board of Education, and they in turn elected by the people? Why should he have more power than the 5 members of the Greenwood County Board of Education when they were elected by the people to serve the interest of education for the people? Why should I, a teacher, have 7 bosses, John Conway, Superintendent Staggers, and 5 members of the Greenwood County Board of Education? A person didn't have to be as far advanced in education as a senior in Lansboro High School to see this. One could be an 8th grader and reason this out. Trustees ruled little marked-off districts like a dictator. John Conway hadn't gone any further than the 3rd grade. He could see that coal was properly placed in the coal house, make ladders for us to use in painting, tell Nancy Corcoran to stop playing a guitar while school was going on. He could do these things, but in all the years he had fought the faith, healing, holiness people to be elected trustee of his district, he had never persuaded the Greenwood County School Board to have a well dug for his school. He hadn't been able to get the house painted. He hadn't offered to dig a well or paint the house himself. I finished my supper, left the table, and sat on the porch to enjoy the cool evening breeze and think about what I would do with my beginners. It was a problem, and I had to think it out for myself. Annis Beeler, one of our neighbors with the best farm in my home community, once said to my father, if he could be alone long enough in a quiet place, he could think through steel. My room was quiet enough, but it was hot as an oven. I lay on my bed and I thought until I heard the clock downstairs strike 12, but I didn't have the solution. That morning when I got up, I was still trying to think of something to do with my beginners. I wanted to start today. They were going into the 4th week already and suffering in the hot schoolroom. Even if the room were of moderate temperature, they still would suffer for lack of something to do. I ate breakfast and got ready for school. I went early and walked slowly along by myself and tried to think of a way. Then I put the thought out of my mind. I couldn't solve the problem. Then I started whistling. I walked along beneath the willows in the morning sun, whistling The Needle's Eye. I watched the little pencil stripes of shifting shadows on the sand the sun made when it found little open spaces betwixt the quivering willow fronds. Above my head, the jeweled dewdrops were evaporating into thin white clouds and ascending toward the sun. It was a beautiful morning. This was the kind of morning that made me want to breathe deeply of the cool, fresh wind. This was the kind of morning that made me want to be alive. It made me want to live forever. Why should I worry about the school problem that had troubled me all night? Maybe it would come to me sometime. Why not walk along on this bright and beautiful August morning and whistle The Needle's Eye? The needle's eye that does supply the thread that runs so true. What was the needle's eye? What was the thread that ran so true? The needle's eye, I finally came to the conclusion, was the school teacher. And the thread that runs so true could only be play. Play. The needle's eye that does supply the thread that runs so true. The teacher that supplied the play that ran so true. Play that ran so true. Play, play, play that ran so true among little children, little foxes, little lambs. Yes, play among big children and grown-ups. My beginners should play. Their work should be play. I should make them think they were playing while they learned to read, while they learned to count. That was it. I had it. Play. My problem wasn't exactly solved, but I thought as long as my beginners could play, they wouldn't want to fall asleep. Not during the school day when they were all together. For on my father's farm, I had seen the lambs playing in the springtime on the green fields. I'd seen them line up and run foot races. Many people might not believe this, but watch for yourself in the spring. Watch the young lambs on the green hills and meadows. I'd seen young foxes play among the monster rocks where they denned. I'd seen them chase each other's tails around and around on top of a sunlit rock. I'd seen the young pretty ring-tailed coons play when they washed their food, a good lesson in sanitation, in an unpolluted mountain stream. I'd seen young groundhogs slide over the slick, warm banks on the cool summer earth on their tummies. I'd seen young rabbits play in the wheat. I'd seen young squirrels play in the green canopy of gray-barked beeches. They were learning self-protection while they played. I'd seen young chickens act as if they heard a hawk and run playfully toward the old hen for protection. That was it. Play. Play. The word was magic to my brain. I'd never thought of it in this light before. Play, play, play. Learn to work by play. All work should be play. Actually, teaching to me was a game. Maybe this was the reason I loved teaching. My steps quickened as the magic word play excited my brain. When time came for my first beginner's class, I tore the big sheet from the Lawson hardwire calendar. I took the scissors from my drawer and sat in a semicircle with the class. Every eye was upon me. I cut the numbers apart, told or asked what they were, and handed them to the children. Then I cut the stiff backs of tablets into squares of approximate size. Taking a jar of paste, I pasted one number to one cardboard. Then I told the class to sit 4 in a seat, I had 8, and paste all the numbers and cardboard squares together. While I went on with my other classes, these children were busy. When recess came, they wanted to do more rather than go out to play. Some numbers were pasted sideways, but what did that matter? They had done well with no more supervision than I had given them. I searched my brain for an idea to tie this with reading and drawing. I drew objects on the board with which they were familiar, apples, cups, balls, and stick figures of boys and girls, in groups of 1, 2, 3, and 4. When time came for my next beginner's class, I asked the children to identify the objects, first by name, which I wrote above the object, then by number, which I wrote beneath it. They were so excited they sat on the edge of the recitation bench, their bare feet tapping nervously on the floor. Then I reached for the stack of number cards and held them up, asking the class to name the number. I was surprised. They recognized so many. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin fall. Every pupil in the room was interested. This was something they had never done, had never seen done, but they recognized it as an interesting way to learn. This was play. This was the thread that ran so true. Realizing this was enough for one time, I asked my beginners if they would like to return to their seats and try to draw the pictures as they were drawn on the board. One idea led to another. There were dozens of ways to use the number cards. The few minutes I had to spend with each class were not nearly long enough. As days passed, the children learned to draw objects to represent a number on a card chosen by someone. They learned to add and subtract numbers and objects. They recognized the number when written. They learned the names of pictures drawn. We varied this by erasing the picture and number and reading the word. We placed a row of number cards along the board in the chalk ledge and let the children draw pictures to represent the number on the card. There were no more little sleepy heads on desk now. With the problem of my beginner solved, something happened to mar my happiness. That morning I'd let Don, Guy, and Ova use their free periods to paint the house. After I had finished my lunch, I walked behind the house to see how the paint was drying. My face must have flushed red as a turkey's snout. There were 12 brown blotches of amber spittle on the last coat of our snow-white paint. They were big enough for people walking along the road to see. When the noon hour was over, I talked to my pupils. I told them that if I caught anybody chewing tobacco on the school ground, I would punish that pupil. If I caught one spitting on the paint, I would spank, and spank hard. I knew it was one of my pupils. There hadn't been anybody else in the schoolyard. And I had in mind, though I didn't accuse anybody, Guy Hawkins and Ova Sailors. I knew they chewed tobacco. I knew that Don chewed tobacco too, but I didn't believe he would spit amber on the paint he had helped put on the schoolhouse. That afternoon, after school was dismissed and we started to finish the painting, we took a bucket of soapy water and a broom and scrubbed off this amber spittle. Then we went ahead with our painting. We worked late and finished the job. Friday, I took my lunch and walked outside and around in back of the schoolhouse. My pupils were sitting under the shade of the tall sycamores eating their lunch, all but one. She was making the amber spittle fly against the newly painted boards. A girl, and Veda Conway, the beautiful 14-year-old daughter of my trustee. "Veda," I said before she saw me, "what do you have in your mouth? What are you doing?" "Nothing," she said. "Don't you spit it out," I warned her. "Let me see what it is." She didn't spit the quid from her mouth. She took it out and showed it to me. Then she looked down at her bare feet. "Why did you do this?" I asked. She didn't answer me, and I asked her again. "Mr. Stuart, I worked in the green tobacco," she said. "It was hot and smelly, and after I quit working in it, I craved a chaw." "You mean you got the tobacco habit by working in green tobacco and smelling it?" I asked her. "Yes," she answered. "I've worked in it all my life, and I never got the habit by smelling green-growing tobacco," I told her. If she had ever chewed tobacco at her home, I had never seen her do so. I thought about the ideas that I had about Ova Sailors and Guy Hawkins. I had actually thought they were the guilty ones. If I had picked over my students trying to select the pupil that had spit amber spittle on this white wall, Veda Conway would have been one of the last I would have picked. I was sorry for ever thinking it was Guy Hawkins and Ova Sailors. "Veda, why did you spit on this white wall?" I asked her. "Because I like to spit on it," she admitted. "I like to see brown against white." "When I dismiss school this afternoon, I want you to remain," I told her. None of the pupils had heard or seen me talking to Veda. I don't believe any of my pupils knew who was spitting on the wall, but that afternoon when I dismissed school, Veda Conway remained. I waited until the schoolyard was cleared of pupils. Don Conway must have known, and I think a few others suspected what was going to take place. I had to back up what I had said. I laid big and beautiful Veda Conway across my lap, and I applied the geography book to her in stinging spanks. Not enough to make her whimper, though. She had hoed too many rows of corn and tobacco, and had pulled too many green worms from the broad leaves of warm, hot tobacco, suckers from the stalks. She was beautiful, but she was durable, and a little spanking didn't hurt her. It only wounded her pride. 2 problems were solved. I had one more. I had to find the guilty person or persons drawing the obscene pictures in the boys' toilet. After I had spanked Veda, she stopped on her way out of the schoolhouse. She stood for a minute before she went out the door and glared at me. "I'll go straight home and tell my daddy on you," she said, still smarting over the spanking. "He'll fix you. He doesn't like you nohow. Not after you talked about moving our school down to the valley." Then she ran out the door, across the schoolyard, and footlog. I finished making my monthly report so I could get my much-needed pay. This was the only rule for the Greenwood County rural teachers that Superintendent Staggers enforced, so far as I knew. The monthly attendance report must be in his office before the teacher's check was sent to him. Veda had made her threat good. She had done what she told me she was going to do. When I got to Conway's, a cold silence greeted me. John Conway had little to say, and the words he used when he said what he was almost forced to say to me were cold words. They were sharp and cold as long icicles hanging from a winter cliff. Bertha didn't bother to speak to me. I knew they regarded Veda as a woman grown. In 2 more years, she would be eligible to marry, and in 4 more years, when she became as old as Flossie, they would regard her as one old enough to marry. If she weren't married or about to get married, they would start worrying about her. I sat down and ate my supper. I was paying for my board and room. I didn't know how much, not yet, but I did know that their cold silence couldn't keep me from eating. I ate my supper, and then I walked to the valley and mailed my attendance report so it would reach Lansboro the following day. I didn't hurry back. I gave my room plenty of time to get cool. When I reached Conway's, the place was silent. They had to get up early and go to the tobacco patch on Saturday morning. John Conway would plan a big day's work since he had all of his children home from school. Veda would smell the green-growing tobacco, and she would perhaps not require a chew. Her system would absorb enough of the intoxication of this magic plant while she pulled the suckers from behind the broad leaves and pulled the big, long green worms from the underbellies of the leaves and pulled them apart with her shapely fingers or laid them on the hot ground and squashed them with her brown, bare feet. We'll stop right there. Another exciting part in Jesse's career there teaching in Lonesome Valley. Starts out really nice, this part of the book did, with him, all the people at school, all the boys there pitching in to help him paint, all those materials that he'd got on his trip to when he went to see the superintendent, and that was in the part we read last week, that the superintendent was just so glad that he wasn't going to quit that he just said yes to everything he needed. So it started out really nice there with everybody pitching in to help and everybody wanting to make the school nicer. He got in the argument there with John Conway, Mr. Conway, that he's staying with, and I understand, I guess my 2 opinions about it is I understand what Jesse's saying about the trustee. Like, why should a trustee be his boss? They're just giving him the room and the board, but why should he be his boss? And when he doesn't even know anything about school, he doesn't understand how it works. So I agree with him about that. And that trustee situation becomes more as the book goes on, more detailed about it. But, and you've probably, like me, if you've read books or even seen movies or something where a teacher has to stay with a trustee like that, how they can make it hard on them. And they're picky about, maybe how much they eat or when they go to bed or, all that kind of stuff. It just gets awkward. So I totally agree with Jesse on that part. And maybe during that time, I might agree with him with his thoughts about wanting to close that little school and move them to the valley. But I don't, as a whole, today agree with that. I'm one of those people that's against consolidation because I believe that each community that has a little small school, even if it's small, I believe that they better serve the children. I believe they better serve the students, and that there's something really powerful, like what John was. He was kind of. Jesse was talking bad about John there a little bit, that he didn't want to close that school because his father had went to it, he had went to it, and maybe even his grandfather had went to it. Well, I think there's something powerful in that. Now, I certainly want it to be a school that's productive and that kids are getting educated in and all that. But anyway, I don't really agree with him on that. My take on that, and my kids are grown now, so it doesn't matter, but would be that like I live in an area where there's a lot of little community schools, and literally since I was in school at one of those little schools, there's been talk of consolidation, and it comes up and it can never fully be passed because people are against it. Well, then the flip side of that is people say, well, there's no money, like how John Conway's kind of saying, how would they get there? How would they get there? And he says, well, eventually the roads will be better, which that's true if the roads were better and it didn't take long to get there, But it's kind of today people say, well, there's not enough money for all those little schools. And I say, well, somehow there's been enough money for, since I was in school somehow. And for me, I just think it's if that's a better way for the kids, let's figure out how to get the money, whether we have fundraisers or, whatever it is. There are a lot of places, not here where I'm at, but in other areas where they did Oh, look what did y'all see that? I had me a snake feeder there. It's like a dragonfly. In a lot of other places where they have consolidated large school districts, and then they realized it did not financially pay off, because when you think about the extra transportation cost, and then my kids, anybody's kids, you got more problems. So for all those things, they found out that it didn't really save any money, and there's some people that are unconsolidating, if that's a word. Anyway, interesting little conversation there, and you can tell that he got on Mr. Conway's nerves, and he didn't like that at all. And I can kind of see him not liking that, but because he's like, here you come in here, boy, and you're going to tell me that you're going to close my school. If you had it in your power, you'd just close it, and my kids would have to go all the way to the valley. So I understand that, but I also understand Jesse saying he don't even know about education, and he shouldn't be trying to tell me how to do things. So I understand both sides, I guess, on that part. When he's trying to think of what he can do to get those beginners to be interested. Now that part I agree with Jesse. Like, if you've not given them anything to do, and then they're just sitting there and they fall asleep, whose fault is that really? I'm one of those people, if I get still, I'll go to sleep. Now I'm just that kind of person. If I get still and sit down somewhere, I'm going to be like, if at night maybe we're sitting together in the living room, before you know it, I'm like starting to nod out. I just get sleepy. So I know if you're bored like that, I do for sure, and I'm sure those little kids were. So, but really interesting how he come up with that play. Like, that's what he decided he'd just come to him. That's how I'll get them to learn, and I'll keep them interested, and I'll keep them awake. But that morning on his walk to school, wasn't that a beautiful description? He said that was the kind of morning made him want to live, was thankful to be alive, and talking about the shadows, the sun coming through the leaves and the trees and the bushes and everything, and leaving the little shadows on the sand, and then the drops of dew and stuff. Oh, it just sounded so beautiful. So some of Jesse Stuart's beautiful description there made me feel like I was walking right along with him. And then I was so happy for him when he realized, play. I can teach him by playing. And even that very first day, he had huge success, even with what he did that day. And as the book goes on, you'll see he comes up with other ways of doing it. But that's really where he stumbles on the thing that really captured children's attention, and then also by way of doing that, educated them, helped their education, further their education. Probably the most surprising part of this last part is Veda chewing tobacco. And I can even kind of understand that she chewed it, because there's, I had women in my family, my grandmother's dipped snuff, so I can understand that people that do, I've not done that, and I don't have no desire to, but I can understand that part. Like she said, she was working in the tobacco and she started craving it. Well, I've never heard of nobody else doing that, but I have heard stories about how that some people that worked in the tobacco like that, they would get deathly sick. And that's why, because nicotine was going in through their fingers. You probably heard the tale about those worms he was talking about pulling off. You probably heard this. A lot of times they would feed them to the chickens, and then the chickens, I've heard stories about like a rooster that it actually killed because it ingested too much nicotine. It just killed him. So I can kind of see that part. Like, again, I'm not a tobacco user and don't want to, but that's, everybody has to make their own decision on that. It's just, I can understand that part's what I'm saying. The part I can't understand is her spitting on the wall. It's the crazy part. But then she's honest, she tells, I just like to see the brown against the white. I just like to see the brown against the white. So you got to give her that she actually is honest and tells that that's what she wants to, she just makes her feel good to see the brown against the white. But you can certainly see when she was mad, because like he said, it didn't hurt her as much as it wounded her pride, and that she went right home and done what she said and told her daddy. And now we'll have to wait till next week to see how that all turns out, see if they all forgive him or if they stay mad at him, and see what happens. I hope you enjoyed this part of the book. It's really really interesting from an education point of view, but really amazing, all the adventures that he has. And remember, like he said in this part, it's only been 4 weeks. He's only been there 4 weeks, and you think about it, he's had to fight somebody Now, sounds like he's about to have to fight his trustee, but he's had to spank his trustee's daughter. All the different things that's happened to him. He got all the tomatoes, the rotten stuff thrown at him, so he's had a really adventurous 4 weeks for sure. Please leave a comment and tell me what you liked about this part of the book, and I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens with Jesse next.